Which tonight is a veritable lib-labble. This is a newly minted and completely useless word coined by my elves. It's the collective noun for a group of L's. And here are some. El Salvador, the Reverend Richard Coles. Elegant Sarah Pascoe. One hell of a guy, Bill Bailey. And a snowball's chance in hell, Alan Davies. Let's hear their hellish buzzers. Sarah goes. Oh. Bill goes. Richard goes. La 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 la. And Alan goes. La la la.
You better come home, Speedy Gonzales.
Let's not do a show. Just listen to that all day. Let's leap in with some laughter. What has four legs and a sense of humour? Bill. Hand and deck. It covers the facts.
It does.
I can't really take anything away from you.
It's technically correct.
It is technically correct.
I deserve points.
You will get them.
Woo!
Lester Pickett's tax return.
Whoa, very good, very good, very good. Not very topical, so some of the younger members of the audience will know what that is.
A laughing hyena.
Well, hyenas have four legs and they do laugh, that's true. But do they have a sense of humour? Or is it just the sound they make mimics, or at least
I don't think it's laughing, is it more? It's more of a sort of a...
It's all right. That was very good.
Well.
Anyway.
A pantomime horse.
Well, no, it's not a pantomime horse.
Pig. Is it a mammal?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a sense of humour.
We know this
Yep.
because it's an animal that has been much observed.
Okay, is this... I know that they can make rats laugh.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay, so rats, they tickle rats.
They tickle rats.
And the rats make tiny little laughs, and it's so interesting.
In fact, they're so high, human ears can't hear them. And we have film of it. It's an Estonian-American researcher, and there he is. He rejoices in the name of Dr. Jaak Panksepp. It may first look as if he's actually torturing, but it is. You will see it returns to his hand. It likes this.
You sure?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Help me! The others are in cages! Can you hear me, anyone?
So I've read quite a lot about this, because actually it's all to do with how they have sex as well. So it's really interesting that if a woman has a female rat, sorry, I really anthropomorphise.
A lady rat.
A lady rat.
If
a lady rat has a bad sexual experience with a male rat, she will never have sex with him again. And even if he's the only available male, she won't.
Yeah.
And if she has a good sexual experience with a fake rat, she'll keep going back to that one. And it's really interesting. That's the whole thing with all the tickling and the play.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of interplay with the male and female rat
You're
to do with lovemaking.
absolutely right.
Did you know, Stephen, that there's a research that shows that bees are pessimists? It's not making this up. I read this in the New Scientist. They would do some sort of stimulus to a bee when a good thing happened, so it would know that something nice was happening. And then another thing when a bad thing was happening, so it would know that something bad was happening. And then they did a sort of neutral stimulus, and the bees all behaved as if it were the bad thing about to happen. They opted for the glass being half empty. Good. So bees are pessimists.
That's right. When you see bees, a lot of the time, when they're buzzing around a plant, they're actually, what they're actually saying is, what's the point? I could get the nectar, I could go back to the hive, but really, where am I going with this?
But even worse than that, because this is all... I always think that bees, it's weird for them because flowers really are using them for a three-way, because flowers can't have sex with each other. So they need the bee to do it with both of them, and the bee's like, I'm not even in a relationship. I'm just... You get off.
I'm just a gimp for you.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a toy.
A go-between. A go-between.
Yeah. All right.
The queen bee, who you'd think might be the one who's having the good life, lays 3,500 eggs a day for 2 years and then dies in excruciating pain, I presume.
See, this is
doesn't even have any supercreme or anything.
Exactly, and it's just the luck of the draw as to which female bee is going to be chosen as the queen. It's
me?
Yeah, please.
Tiara.
All of it.
It proves that saying, you know, we have to when you explain to kids about sexual reproduction, you tell them about the birds and the bees. That's just not fit for purpose at all, is it? Really, the birds, yeah, just about bees. No, you know, we're going to be sexless lackeys for a monstrous sugar giant. You know, that isn't. I'm not telling that to any kids. Okay.
But in terms of human and animal sensitive humour, there is Coco, a gorilla born in San Francisco Zoo, you may know about, who knows supposedly 2,000 words and 1,000 sign language words, said to comprehend both puns and slapstick. The puns, and this, you believe it or don't, she was once asked, what can you think of that is hard? And she replied, a rock and work. Extraordinary. That's a category slip. You know, it's a genuine sort of pun.
That's a zoigma, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a zoigma. Yes.
She needs a couple more, and she could do.
Yeah, you get that's a good word. It's zoigma or zoigma. Yeah. Slapstick. She once tied her trainer's shoelaces together and then signed the words "Chase me." The brilliant Miriam Rothschild, of whom you may have heard, she did much work on pond life of various animals and extraordinary life cycles. Incredible species. But she also had a parrot that could imitate her calling the dog and whistling and saying for a walk, and the dog would arrive, and then the parrot would laugh. Extraordinary thing. You know this joke, you must know it. It's his friend as a parrot, and the sports results are going, and he goes, Norwich 1, Ipswich 2. And the parrot goes, oh, what's going on there? So well, every time Norwich lose, the parrot cries and bursts into tears. And he says, well, what happens when Norwich win? I don't know, I've only had it 4 years. It came from the heart, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, there are all kinds of different human laughter, which have been categorised by Dr. Dirk Wildgruber of the University of Tübingen in Deutschland. There are some types of joyful laughter. Thank you. That was sarcastic joyful laughter. Slightly different.
Terrifying.
Joyful laughter! Social laughter. Taunting laughter. Oh dear. Schadenfreude laughter. Any other kinds in your head?
Laughter where people, you tell them something and then they laugh like they've got it, and then they realise they don't. They go,
and there's also, of course, the Sid James type of sexual laughter.
When we were doing Jonathan Creek, we had these two prop boys on these lots of Rolling Stone, and one of them, there's another one who didn't know any of it, and he kept thinking, all the time he's thinking, what do they mean? And one morning they said to me, oh, we had a lovely bit of Sinatra on the van this morning, and he went, the other fella, and they looked at him, and we were just playing some Frank Sinatra. Oh, sorry, I thought it was a slang thing. What, meaning? That doesn't mean you laugh. Well, I just thought it was going to be funny because it was a slang thing, so I thought I'd laugh. Normally it's a slang thing and then we all laugh. I never understand it.
There's a very particular kind of laughter which you get when people occasionally listen to your sermon. There's a sort of polite laugh that you get like in a Shakespeare play.
Oh, yeah,
a Shakespeare joke.
Shakespeare.
There's a,
Yes.
Because even I sin. And how do and when do rats get sad?
They're dying.
When they stop tickling them?
When you stop thinking, it might be slightly disappointing.
Oh,
When they're cold, in the sewers, they all sleep together. And when the frost comes, and they all freeze to death.
We've shown
They
before.
get found sleeping all
Tangles.
in a circle, and the reason they're all connected is because their urine that comes out of them constantly is frozen, and they're just a solid urine disc with rats in it.
Sad. Think of the word sad, or think of sad.
Seasonal affective disorder.
Seasonal
In the winter.
affective disorder. No.
You get sad in the summer.
The winter is for people like us who are diurnal, who live by day. Rats are nocturnal. So we have circadian rhythms, and they have, for an extra point, circanoctial. Circanoctial. Yeah, circanoctial.
I can say Latin.
They have around the night rhythms. We have around the day rhythms. But in Scandinavian countries, where in winter it's very, very dark for a very long time, they use things almost like usherette trays with ultraviolet tubes. And they get about an hour or two of that, and they cheers them up, because melatonin is produced in the brain that cheers them up. It's one of the things that cheers you up. But they found with rats, somatostatin, which is a depressive, was caused in those that had too much sunlight.
so what do they provide? Sunglasses for the...
Yes. There you are. Rats get sad in summer, not in winter. Here's something that sounds ludicrous, but is no laughing matter. What's a really ostentatious way to turn off a gas fire?
La la.
Send a flood.
You and your God.
Yes, rats.
Rats. No, it's trying to use, in a benign way, the most powerful force that man has ever harnessed.
Sarcasm. Polish out a gas fire. Where would we be without sarcasm, eh?
Sarcasm needs a pipe.
Yeah, you need a pipe with sarcasm. Yeah, great. It's the sarcasm, it's the sarcasm slammer.
So, yeah.
Fusion power.
Fission power is the one we've yet to harness fusion. We hope to, but fission is the one we have harnessed.
For nuclear bombs.
Yes.
Yeah, fission.
And the first one was the A-bomb.
Yeah.
And then the father of the H-bomb was a physicist. Was Edward Teller, you're absolutely right. Teller, like a lot of scientists, was an idealist, and he felt like we have this enormous source of power. Surely we can't only use it for weapons. And he quoted the Bible, he quoted Isaiah, saying, we've got these weapons, let's use them for something peaceful. And what's the Isaiah quotation?
You would beat your sword into a ploughshare.
That's right. We'll beat your swords into ploughshares. And he dreamt up all kinds of weird plans to use H-bombs, like, for example, widening the Panama Canal. Or making... Yeah, I know, it seems a little bit speculative. Yeah, Crossrail. And what's that one, H2N2, whatever it's called?
HS2.
HS2, yeah. Exactly, through Buckinghamshire. Just basically a huge... Well, and they thought, well, maybe not the Panama Canal, we'd just get one through...
Anywhere, really.
Nicaragua. Using 22 nuclear bombs to build a massive road and railway path through the Bristol Mountains in California, Project Carryall. There was another one using 1,000 nukes to blast a city-sized airship into space. I mean, they spent money on all of these. Operation Plowshare, it was called. And the Russians did the same.
What's the smallest nuclear bomb you could have, like to just maybe knock out a bit of a building if you were doing the extension?
Just for like
Two things were actually tried, because all the rest were just shelved and the money stopped coming in. One was detonating nukes underground to create steam to generate electricity. This was abandoned when it turned out to be impossible to contain the explosions. Using nukes for fracking natural gas, which worked, but the gas was radioactive. A bit of a PR disaster in your kitchen.
Like the oven.
It's going to play very well in the Tory home counties.
Yeah,
We're only going
play.
to frack you, but we're going to blow you up with a nuclear device.
Exactly, but there was one very successful one the Russians did. They used 5 times, 4 of them completely successful, but none of them with any fallout that was destructive, and that was putting out huge gas field fires. And so successful it was that the Americans considered using it in the deep water...
The BP thing.
The BP thing,
really?
yeah, in the Gulf of Mexico, yeah, in the Deepwater Horizon, as it was called, the disaster.
We're going to nuke it.
Well, they were, yeah.
Good luck spinning that.
The
Look away now.
India's first nuclear device, do you know what that was called and when it might have been?
It was a curry. It was so strong. It literally blew your head off.
The Vindaloo bomb was not...
People's eyes were watering for 1,000 square miles. God, that's so strong. Ah, God, just the smell of it. Ah.
It was actually called the Smiling Buddha. It was set off in 1974. Now for something a little more local. Name some domestic appliances that really nobody wants.
La la.
In a vicarage, a tie rack.
That is good. I can't take that away from you.
I'm appealing, sir. There's an act of great pedantry here, but there's not technically an appliance.
This is electronic type.
An auto steam tie rack.
There are tie racks that go
Really?
Yeah, there are.
Such a thing
electric
exists?
ones, I promise you.
Wow.
And that actually takes us to what the right answer is. When you said steam,
Those Corby trouser presses that you have in hotel rooms.
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone use or heard of anyone using.
brilliant. Do you mean others don't? Am
You've
I
used
the only
one?
I used them.
Not necessarily for trousers. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Whoa. Anyway, there's a whole load of appliances that were made in the 1920s and 30s when a lot of British people were starting to get a little bit more prosperous just before the crash. And they thought about going on the electric, as it used to be said. We're going on the electric. And what would be the killer app that would put them on the electric? The thing they wanted to have most?
Electric
Heat.
light,
That would be one.
plug-in radio.
The wireless set.
yeah.
And who were the other main suppliers other than electricity that had already been there? Gas. They thought, well, what we'll do is provide gas-powered radios to stop people from going on the electric. And there's an example of one. And they put them out and they said, oh, not only will you get the BBC, but you will warm the room slightly. And increase the glow of your contentment. Increase the chances of your house exploding. And not only did they produce wirelesses, they produced trouser presses, oddly enough, washing machines, washing up machines, everything that you can think of that is a household appliance, a white good, as we would now say.
There were gas-powered fridges, weren't there?
Yes, there were indeed. Very much so. But they just didn't catch on because electricity was just more reliable. And it's not that the gas actually powered the radio so much as that the gas created the current that powered the radio. So it was still electric, it's just you use your existing gas main. And how does that work? How can gas create electricity?
You get heat, and then you put it in a machine.
A special machine with a magnet in it.
Well, they burn coal for power stations.
Well, that's true, and
that process.
that's turning a turbo. You haven't got a turbo. It's the difference. It's the difference in cold and heat creates. It's the thermoelectric effect. And the Russians used it with kerosene way out in Siberia and places that were incredibly cold there, and they actually recommended, God bless communism, that people open the window to hear the radio better. So the distinction between the cold outside and the hot inside was even greater, which created this current. And talking of radio, in the 1930s, there was a magnificent programme that I would have loved. There was a fellow called F.H. Wallace, who was the Phil the Power Taylor of his day, by which I mean darts professional, just a great darts player. And he played in the Alexander Arms in Eastbourne, and he, on the radio, would throw 3 darts from 301 down, and his score would be announced. And then there would be a pause while people at home could throw 3 darts, and they would write down their score. And if they beat him, they didn't get a prize. They could say, pat yourself on the back when you go to work tomorrow. That's it. And that was a whole radio series. I'm not saying people were easily pleased in those days, but I think it
I
was
just look
charming.
forward to the internet and people on those kind of gala bingo sites. Like, you get free £5.
Yeah.
It's the same now, and they're just doing that on their own. Out the back, you lost 56 quid.
Anyway, moving on. Now for some uneasy listening. What's the most depressing radio programme of all time?
Oh, Simon Bates by miles.
Well, surely that's the story of people who fell in love. She did die of the cancer, but...
He battled through the cancer, and then here's their song. Too Drunk to Fuck by the
For those not familiar with what we're talking about, Simon Bates used to run a series called Our Tune. Our Tune. And people wrote in basically the most depressing story of how they were in love with someone who then died
God,
of
it was nausea.
some disease. Read out we met and we fell in love. And, she was then
a series of awful
diagnosed with this. She was run over by a vehicle. She lost all use of her limbs.
Sure, people sent them in and just made it up.
Sadly, she did die, but to this day, Knock 3 Times is our song and all we
A massive nuclear explosion that was used to put out a fire, and then a rat burrowed its way through her leg and weed in her eye, and she struggled on with a gas radio for companions. And
This is Radio 1. This is supposed to be a hip young station.
Just right up to date, I have to say I have several correspondents who would say that Saturday Live was the most depressing radio station.
Really?
Yeah. Well, we have to get rid of this thing now that you're interactive with your audience. So actually, as you're broadcasting live, you have a screen in front of you with a Twitter feed on. Not advisable, ladies and gentlemen.
No.
It's a very good moral and spiritual discipline, because everything you say is immediately commented on by some regular...
With hashtag Saturday Live or hashtag Richard Coles is a...
Smugmeister Twat Vicar. Swear there is someone who does hashtag Smugmeister and another one hashtag Twat Vicar.
Oh, Richard, that's so unfair.
And it's my mother.
Think...
I did a thing once. I wrote an article in which the joke was in the article was on me, but I did call Frank Lampard a twat, and it was a joke. Anyway, he complained about it, and I thought I better find the article because I can't remember what I wrote. So I googled Frank Lampard twat, and nothing came up. And then I googled my own name with twat, and so much stuff came up.
That's dangerous.
They're really dangerous. And then I started googling my name with any other term of abuse, and I had really one of the worst evenings of my life.
Never do that.
No,
You never
can't
Google
do
it. That should be like that should be a commandment. Thou shalt not Google thyself.
There was an awful time, which I think has passed, when if you put in the C word into Google, the first
Your name
return...
would come up.
No.
Excuse me?
Virtually that. If you typed in the C word, the first thing that came up was Englishman.
Oh. If you want to learn some new words, you can always do the Guardian Easter piece on the online edition and then read the below-the-line comments afterwards.
It's like looking into a sewer, isn't it?
I know. Sometimes it's good, though, I have to say. There was Ronan Keating doing a version of Fairy Tale of New York by the Pogues.
He didn't.
Yes, he did. It is as horrific as it sounds. He has to Irish himself up a bit to be the Pogues. But there's a tsunami of hate which accompanies it on the YouTube comments. But my favourite YouTube comment of all time, it just says, "This is the worst thing that ever happened." And it sort of is.
I used to do this listener complaint programme for Radio 5 when that first started. It used to be live people calling. There was a woman who phoned up once, I saw her name, I remember it was Marjorie from Hemel Hempstead. And I took the call and I said to Marjorie from Hemel Hempstead, "What's your complaint?" And she said, "I'm absolutely disgusted with everything," and put the phone.
Bless her. Well, the most depressing radio of all time may have been Simon Bates. It certainly isn't Saturday Live, which I urge you to listen to every Saturday with Richard at the microphone. Drahtfunk.
Drahtfunk.
Yeah. Wire radio. And what happened is the Swiss and the Norwegians and Swedish discovered that they could use, first of all, electricity, which they'd bored holes through the mountains for. They could use electricity to transmit radio. And then, when phone lines were installed, phone. And the Germans used this in the war. And they used it for very depressing broadcasts about bomber raids that were coming over because it couldn't be scrambled. And nor would the bombers be able to use live radio that the Germans had to fix their position. So they could close their radio stations down during the night and use these, and German people would listen and they get grid references. You know, there's a bomber wave coming and it's on F-14 and the people of Stuttgart or wherever it might be would go, oh God, it's coming towards us, and they'd be able to get into the shelters. So it was depressing, that's the point. It was depressing radio. It was always bad news.
Did they play songs in between?
No, they didn't.
Missing a trick
Beach
there.
Boys. They do that on... have you ever heard Radio Pyongyang?
Never have.
Oh, you've got to listen to it. It's mostly songs about the great
beloved
leader,
leader.
how marvellous he is, interspersed with incredibly terrifying broadcasts by the lady who reads the news, who goes like to a rather dramatic sort of thing. But the awful thing is if you buy a radio in North Korea, it's pre-tuned.
Oh, of course.
You can only get Radio Pyongyang. That's the only thing you can get. But people try to smuggle in sets from China for a bit of variety. You get, I know, Gardner's question time.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Alan, would I enjoy kissing any of the gunner's daughters?
Yes, you would. No, you wouldn't. There are no daughters.
Well,
By kissing, do you mean...
yes, in all those cases, you're right. You're right to be cagey. Of course, it's nothing to do with the Arsenal.
Isn't there a band? There's a band from Seattle called Kissing the Gunner's Daughter.
Is there really?
Yes, there is, yeah.
Well, do you know what it refers to?
I do, actually, yes. It's a naval term, is it?
Yes, it is naval.
It's a rather unpleasant term
Describe.
for being strapped to a cannon and then being beaten.
Yes, whipped with the famous
The cat o' nine
With the
cat o'
tails.
nine
Cat o' nine
tails.
tails.
Absolutely
Yes.
right. It was horrific. What's extraordinary is it's still in use. Not in the British Navy, or not in Britain.
Did you know that the victim had to make their own cat?
Often they did. Not always, but often they did.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was their best friend, which was miserable.
That's right, you make one out of blancmange. Oh, that's all I had.
There's another naval punishment. You can get furked.
I'm sorry.
You can get furked.
Explain.
You get furked if you're... it's just true, I'm not making this
Don't
up.
keep saying it. Explain it.
It was the punishment. If you were a cook in the galley and you ruined the meal, you got furked.
You really like saying it, though, don't you?
You just can't know what you mean. But they would take the staves from a firkin and beat you without, and it was called being furked.
Oh, firkin being a large barrel.
Firkin being, well, not a very large, but you were beaten with the staves from a firkin. Furked. That's true.
Wow, that's brilliant. Well, also, apart from the gunner's daughter, at the time the Royal Navy enlisted boys as young as 9 who were running errands and so on, help with the cooking. And these cabin boys were punished in a marginally more humane way by being bent over a gun and lashed on the bare bottom. This was called kissing the gunner's daughter. And the lash itself was known as the boy's pussy. Sounds all wrong. Or it was called the boy's cat or just pussy.
Oh.
It had only 5 strands of whipcord with no knots in it. It was sort of Sony's My First Cat o' Nine Tails. It's like, it was the A-level version. And that was kissing the gunner's daughter. Pretty nasty. From lashings to lèse majesté. Why was George III very nearly literally toast in 1776?
1776, you say?
Is a rather important year in...
Was it the firing of the colonies?
Ah, very good. Well, yes, I mean, it is the year, of course, of American independence, yes. But the fact is, there's a rather marvellous MP who died in 1813 and was well ahead of his time, and about whom more should be known. His name was Hartley, David Hartley, and he was a scientist, he was a friend of Benjamin Franklin, and he was the first MP to present a bill opposing slavery decades ahead of anyone else. But his main claim to fame is his work on the fireproofing of houses, which he achieved by placing metal sheets under the floorboards so the joists wouldn't catch fire. And they were so successful that he invited George III to his house in Putney, which was a special fireproof house. Breakfast was served in one of the rooms. The kettle was boiled on a fire made on the bare floorboards. Hartley went upstairs, set fire to a bed, which set fire to the curtains, while Hartley lit 2 more fires on the stairs. So it's like a sort of stuntman. One under the stairs, all burned merrily.
And then they all died of smoking.
He then put fires under the rooms on the floor below the royal family with tar, pitch and kindling and set fire to it. And everyone survived. It was all fine. And he was made somewhat of a local hero, and indeed a national
Local
hero.
fire officer.
And it all, as it were, caught on because a lot of people thought, well, this is the way to avoid fires. It was a most impressive thing.
It would be an amazing assassination attempt to just say, hey, I've made a fireproof house. Why don't you come round and I'll show you? Guy Fawkes, number 2. See you later.
Yeah, true.
Teething issues.
Fortunately, they trusted him. But his major and lasting achievement is that he invented the fire curtain for theatres. So whenever you go in the interval and you see a fire curtain drop down rather dully or beautiful, and it just says fire curtain.
So he's the real Mr. Sands.
Exactly. You know, but to explain about Mr. Sands.
Well, sometimes it's Dr. Sands, but so essentially they do this on the tube and in theatres. If you hear an announcement asking for Dr. Sands or something about Sands, it means there's a fire somewhere in the building.
Yeah.
So if your name is actually Mr. Sands and you want to go to the theatre, and then you kind of go there and you ask for your tickets, people will start running away.
Theatre burned down all the time, didn't they?
Oh, extraordinary.
There's a lovely story of, wasn't it Sheridan, who was the owner of his theatre, and it caught fire, and he was outside, and he wasn't planning, he was sitting there, and he was having a drink, and somebody said, Mr. Sheridan, surely you should throw buckets of water on this. And he said, can't a man take sack by his own fireside?
The only difference, the globe that they've made now on South Bank, the only difference between that and the original is that you're not allowed to have a thatched roof in London anymore, and that's the only difference from the Elizabethan one.
Well,
Because it would
yes,
catch
Shakespeare's
fire.
Globe caught fire and was put out by beer. It was
was
thrown
it
over
beer
it.
through it?
Yeah, in his day, which is rather pleasing. I don't know why, but it is. Now, let's get a little lachrymose. What are Dutch tears?
Dutch courage is when you drink booze as a euphemism for something.
Well, because we went to war with Holland so many times, at least 3 Dutch wars, that we tended to use the word Dutch wife, Dutch uncle, Dutch courage.
So it's some sort of teardrop.
It is a tear-shaped thing.
A tear-shaped
Actually,
thing.
from Mecklenburg, or at least it was introduced to Britain from Mecklenburg by Prince Rupert of the Rhine. Does that
Why
mean
you
anything to
say
you? I don't know.
that in that way?
Prince Rupert of the Rhine, played by Timothy Dalton in the film Cromwell, you may remember, a very dashing figure, probably was responsible for Charles I losing the Civil War.
Is it some sort of ammunition?
It's not. In fact, I'm going to show you what it is. It's
It's a decorative thing.
It's very extraordinary. I'm going to pick up this object here. It's a light box, and so I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to get my little camera here, and maybe you can see. There we are. It's a sort of tadpole-like thing. What it is if I turn you can see this is actually a polarized filter. So what you're seeing is this moire effect in the middle. Because if you take an ordinary drop of molten glass, you drop it into cold water, it instantly solidifies, of course. The outer part, the part that hits the water, solidifies first. The inner part doesn't have time to get as hard as the outer part. Tries to contract, there's no space for it to contract. So there is a kind of tension built into it. This is a kind of time bomb waiting to happen, but it's held together by the hard outer casing. And if I were to clip off the tail, it would release all the energy inside it, and it would explode. And not only would it explode at a speed 3 times greater than a sniper's bullet. Incredibly fast. In fact, so fast.
That's how much kind of energy is
so
just
fast I'm
stuck
going to have to do it in a little bowl. So I'm going to put the camera aside here. But firstly, I'll show you that it's really solid because I can smack it with a hammer and it won't even vaguely be hurt. Look. Maybe you can start being a cameraman now, young Alan. Yep, that's it. Put those on just in case it breaks. There you are.
Ready, sir?
Yep. Now, can you see that there?
I don't know. It hasn't got any kind of viewfinder.
No, look at there.
Oh, look, there.
That's terrific.
Oh, no.
this glass and absolutely hammering it. All right? That is so bloody solid.
This looks like one of the weirdest court scenes I've ever seen. Order!
So you have to believe me that you hammer it and hammer it and hammer it and hammer it, and we've now got one. I'm going to put these gloves on because health and safety above all is my watchword.
But also they look good.
And oh, Alan, you old queen.
Just filling in. I'm just filling in.
So here we are now.
Oh, that's making me feel giddy.
I don't know if you can see here, but I've got one in here. You have to try and be...
Oh, damn. That's awful.
What you have to try and be now is try and be a good cameraman, Alan. Can you see that one in there? And all I have to do is try and clip the tail.
Oh, God.
Oh, Lord.
I'm quite scared.
If I clip the tail, it should release the energy of this.
Oh!
There you are, the whole thing exploded. So having hit it there, that's tail. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to my glamorous assistant. You can probably see a little slowed down version of that.
Wow.
Pretty amazing. And that's just clipping the absolute end of the tail, even though you can smash the head of it, and it won't be hurt. We have in the audience Stephen Ramsey from Imperial College, who's kindly lent us these Rupert's tears. Are you there, Stephen?
Yeah, hi, Stephen.
Thank you very much. So, when was this effect discovered?
I think when you have the glass blowers working from the hot furnace, they gather the glass on their irons, and to get rid of the excess glass off the end of the iron, they would stand them into the hot water, and some of these droplets would drop off and get the super hard and toughened glass. And I think probably someone by accident just I'll snap the end off that, and suddenly had an explosion.
And I believe that super hard toughened effect is what we all rely on for our windscreens in cars.
Yes, that's how toughened glass was first made, by pulling the glass and then blowing cold air onto the surface to super cool it.
Theoretically, could it put out a gas fire?
Actually, when Will Bowden approached me to make these Rupert box drops for the show, and in my lifetime as a glass blower, I've made them many times, and I always have a 2-litre glass vessel, which I put on my bench and drop the hot glass in. And I dropped one in and I thought, good. And as I watched it exploded, and the shockwave under the water actually blew a 2-inch hole in the glass vessel.
Wow. Well, thank you for introducing Will Bowen, who is our science self. And thank you, Stephen Ramsey. Well, that was very exciting. I love a laboratory lark. And now it's time to tweak the tail of general ignorance. So fingers on buzzers, please. Here's a question about Lent. Whom should you visit on Mothering Sunday?
La la.
Yes.
Your vicar.
Explain.
Well, Mothering Sunday was the return of usually children in service to the mother church of where they lived. So it wasn't going to see your mum, you'd go to the mother church, and they'd pick primroses to take to their nearest and dearest. That's
Correct.
what I think.
You're absolutely right. And as a churchman, I suppose you should know that. Most of us believe, of course, it is just a greeting card opportunity or a flower opportunity to be nice to your mother, which is what it's become. But it's actually nothing to do with your biological mother. It's to do with your mother church.
Do you think that excuse is going to hold up next year for any of us?
I think I knew when I was young, and it was called Mothering Sunday rather than Mother's Day.
Yeah, it's always been Mothering.
Yeah, but they tend to call it Mother's Day now, don't they?
Yeah, it's just another chance to sell another
Oh,
card.
totally, yeah.
Do you know, sometimes
Lisa's
a
Day,
greetings
Nephew's Day.
card is the most marked up thing on general sale. But I said, what about cinema popcorn?
Oh, very good.
The markup.
Oh, it must be enormous.
I thought it was eggs,
Eggs?
because an omelette costs so much more than an egg.
That's true.
Your mind works in mysterious ways, has wonders to perform. On Mothering Sunday, you visited your mother church, not necessarily your mother.
No.
Now, what colour are the flags on the moon?
Do they look different when you're there? Are there no flags? There's no moon?
There
Oh,
are
God.
Within about 100 claps of persuasion. 5 times bitten, 5 times shy.
La la.
Are they grey?
Grey is probably a reasonable answer. One thing you can be absolutely certain is they're not red, white and blue.
Right.
The temperature extremes are really remarkable on the moon. From 100 degrees Celsius heat for 14 days, and then 14 days of 150 degrees minus Celsius. So it's going through all that. Plus, there's no atmosphere, so no protection from ultraviolet light. And we know enough what a set of curtains or a sofa that's in, daylight for in a couple of years can get faded. So you can imagine what a flag would be like. And they're made of nylon, so bleached white, probably powdered nothingness by now.
This came up at Mothers Union the other day. The space... the Voyager...
Favourite so much does.
The Voyager spacecraft, yes.
Yes.
The
Still
furthest man-made object from Earth, yes?
Yeah.
1977.
Yeah.
Would it look scruffy?
It's a really good question.
I mean, would the paint have gone in, I don't know, solar...
I imagine when it went through the Kuiper belt and things like that, it probably would have got a bit of a bashing.
Dents.
My favourite thing about the Voyager that I like is that they think that it's left our solar system.
Yeah.
They're not sure, and they've estimated that the time it will take to reach the next solar system is 40,000 years.
I know, it's phenomenal, isn't it?
And it's going to go out of radio transmission in about 10 years' time, and then it's just...
And I thought West Anglian trains. Anyway, all the stars and stripes on the moon are now plain white, or possibly grey, if they've survived at all. What was the first man-made sonic boom? Yes, whip crack. Whip crack, whip crack away, whip crack away, whip crack away. You're right that whip cracks are sonic booms. There's been recent development in the field of sonic booms, or in the field of a strange thing called food physics.
Oh, dear.
Food physics? There was such a thing as food physics.
Is it popcorn?
It might be popcorn. It's basically crunchy food. Oh. It's a bizarre idea that someone might think, hang on, do we really understand crunchy food? But Dr. Toon van Vliet, who's a Dutch food physicist, spent the past 7 years figuring out just how crunch works. And he basically says crispiness and crunchiness appeal to us because they signal freshness. The staler the chip, obviously, the quieter it is, or any fruit that gets soft and mushy. For food to go crunch when it's bitten, there must be what's called a brittle fracture, a sudden high-speed crack, which actually travels at least 300 metres per second, which is the speed of sound. So you're getting a sonic boom from... Yeah. So, in a sense, we eat by our ears because a lot of our interest and appetite is engendered by the fact that we know food is crunchy.
But you wouldn't want any crunchy hummus.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the way to go. Crunchy hummus. Could be. It's a good name for a band, anyway. Whatever.
Each crunch in crunchy foods is a teeny-weeny sonic boom. And with that, it's the scores. I simply don't know what to say. Despite his superior knowledge and his holiness, in last place with -8, it's the Reverend Richard Coles. Third place with -6 is Bill Bailey. I just don't know how I'm going to say this. In second place with -1 is Sarah Pascoe. You've got that before me. Because in first place, and this may be a first for first place, with +4 is Alan Davies. So, it only remains for me to thank Sarah, Bill, Richard and Alan. I leave you with the last words of someone who was not so much scraping the barrel as draining it. Dylan Thomas's last triumphant uttering, "I've had 18 straight whiskies. I think that's the record." And then he died. Good night.